Hello everyone, I'm designing a banner for my channel. I shouldn't have gone to college for video game design or video game development. I went to ECBI, College of Technology, in 2008 because I assumed I needed to go to college in order to learn how to develop video games. Well, in 2011, ECBI changed their name to ECBI University to look smart, I guess. Where do I begin? I barely had any classes related to video game development. I learned C++ and a lot of MySQL, no C Sharp. I learned ActionScript in my web development classes in 2011. Flash is considered a joke and a novelty for web development in this day and age. We skipped the video game development chapter in my Adobe Flash CS book. Months later, I went back and I completed that chapter, and I feel that chapter was a pretty good reason as to why a lot of game and simulation students definitely need to learn Flash. I guess the higher ups never heard of Newgrounds. I remember my first interview straight out of college. I thought I was going to get the job. I arrived on time, I was dressed professionally, I had a really nice portfolio with a bunch of stuff related to Flash. I was excited. My manager not only arrived 30 minutes late, he was wearing capris and flip-flops. This manager looked like he was about ready to go golfing. I'm never going to forget the other employees skateboarding around the office either. The manager told me straight up that he hates students from ECPI because their courses are far behind. I had built a website in Flash, and this company already moved on to CSS and HTML. Already my portfolio was rendered worthless in 2011. Also, he basically told me that my bachelor's degree could go into the toilet. My portfolio was really what mattered. I was in the game and simulation program at ECPI, the program that promises that students will learn how to develop video games. Well, game and sim students didn't even get to learn Photoshop. I now use Photoshop every day for my projects. Game developers need Photoshop for textures, concept sketches, etc. The web development students receive the Photoshop courses. I believe that ECBI should have gave game and sim and web development students Photoshop classes instead of just the web developers. In my rare game development classes, I learned GameMaker and TrueSpace and some other program that was nothing to write home about. Before anyone says anything, I know Undertale was made with GameMaker, but this was 2011 when GameMaker was vastly looked down upon. Most of the games I made didn't require any programming, just drag and dropping. At the time, I had hiring managers laugh in my face when they saw that GameMaker experience was on my resume. I never touched Maya, Unity, or Blender, so there weren't a lot of simulation jobs. Here's my old work straight out of ECPI. These are school projects that I learned in the web development courses. Why were the web development students learning Flash and Photoshop only? Why not both the game and simulation students and the web development students? In regards to the interview I mentioned earlier, why weren't the classes up to date on their information? There were smart teachers who tried to steer the game and simulation program into the right direction. I had a class where the class was separated into two parts, the art team and the game programmers. We were developing an app. Each of us had a different role, and I was art director. That was an experience. Unfortunately, the game was not released because the PlayStation Network was hacked that year, and we were making a cartoonish game about hacking, but our teacher didn't want to take any chances. The game went down the drain. That was my first experience with failed game projects, but it was a fun experience nonetheless. I came back to ECBI a few months back to get something, and this same class and the same teacher was discussing working in Unity 3D with the students. I worked for the same teacher for my externship, and he had me develop a game in Flash. That's when I learned that thinking about programming a video game is different than actually programming the game itself. You'd be surprised how many aspiring game developers don't figure this out early. But those game development classes were few and far between. I would see a lot of former career advisors from ECPI working at different companies because they knew that some of the courses were absolute BS. All of these former career advisors had the opinion that ECPI was steering students in the wrong direction. Despite all this, a few students tried to develop video games on their own time. A lot of this was talk about making a very awesome video game, and then said student realizes that making a game requires time, and then they quit developing their awesome video game. A lot of type of these students didn't want to stay back after school, despite literally having nothing to do after school, and discuss the steps needed to develop a video game. Eventually, I found two startup companies. I was the artist and the co writer of the first company I joined. Being a startup company, I was working for free. I drew a few sketches while my boyfriend transformed one of my drawings into a 3D model. There was a few problems with the startup company. We had way too many people come together for our first and only project. We had too many smart people from college who didn't understand how to work on something outside of school or work. And our first project was a massive multiplayer online game, a genre that should never be anyone's first commercial video game. The money and the amount of people and server space needed to make such a game happen is insane. We were too ambitious. After 4 years of trying, everyone quit and the company was disbanded. I might go over this failed game company more in the future. I feel like people can learn from my experience, but I'll post these stories on my Dark Siren Games channel. The second company I joined was another startup. This one was far better off because the group was developing a platformer for kids and the volunteers were pretty dedicated. In fact, the game is still being worked on today. Believe it or not, my visual novel artwork on my Dark Siren Games website and YouTube and VidMe channel is what got me a temporary position with that company as a character artist. Things didn't work out because I was a character artist drawing landscapes. The manager let me go because he was disappointed in my landscape artwork, despite me telling him that was my weakness as an artist. Maybe I just shouldn't have taken the offer to begin with. The next thing that was a good thing at UCPI was constantly playing in the video game room. I ended up making so many friends playing Super Smash Bros. Brawl. I would stay back a lot after school and play Brawl or Dead or Alive 4 with other people. We would talk about stuff. I would drive some of these people home. We would talk about our lives. It was fun. I was making a lot of friends. Eventually, I was invited to an apartment where people were seriously playing fighting games. Having the whole video games are evil and you'll never amount to anything if you continue playing video games mentally beat into my head as a child, I'm glad to be part of the fighting game community because I've met other artists, writers, and generally people who understand that being a geek is a-okay. Believe it or not, the fighting game community is a pretty diverse place. This was a pretty huge confidence booster. I'm glad I got to be introduced to the fighting game community through college. I went back to ECPI to get something a few years later, and they've closed down that room. It was a very social room for students. It sucks seeing that place close down. I graduated from ECPI in 2011. I was more fit for database jobs and IT jobs rather than game and simulation jobs like the college used to advertise so much on TV. On my own time, I learned so much about video game companies, video game development, and how much I don't want to work for someone else's video game company anymore. I've researched enough horror stories in the workplace, seen companies come and go, and realized that the majority of the games that I liked and wanted to create were niche games and not AAA material. If I could go back in time, I would tell my younger self that I could learn how to develop a game through Google and Udemy for cheaper options than ECPI. A lot of managers in the artistic and game development field want to see a portfolio and not a piece of paper saying that you graduated from so and so school. There are a huge mix of people who skipped college, made a wonderful portfolio, and ended up working at a video game company. Looking back, I wish I went to the Art Institute instead, as far as colleges go, because I know people who graduated with some very awesome skills at the end, but I have the discipline to do the research and practice on my own now. What I'm doing now is creating story driven games using RenPy. I'll discuss this later on my Dark Siren Games channel. Please tell me what you think, guys. Have a nice day.
Player guides were a big thing back then because the internet wasn't as big as it is now. I either had to ask a friend how they got out of a situation in a video game, or have that friend come over my house and help me out of that situation I was stuck in, like Majora's Mask.